Okay, in the interest of science, I'm going to break this battery off this board. I hope. The instructions I've been giving are to put a flat plate in and turn it this way so that you're levering that way. I'm guessing that maybe if you put it in, maybe not. If you try and lever it out that way. Right. Possibly the batteries have this problem are harder in the holder. Right, I'm going to stick the tweezers underneath the holder. There we are. That's come off at that end. Can we see this? You'll see that what's under that end is not copper coloured, it's fiberglass coloured. It's pulled the pad off the actual board. It took some effort, and I think maybe the batteries that are dying prematurely are possibly swelling, maybe, or maybe they're just, the way they've been made is a larger size and they're tighter in the cell holder, so maybe they get stuck more. Anyway, if the cell only comes off at this end, it's a relatively easy thing to fix, because you just want to, without bending it up too far and hopefully not taking the tab off at this end, if you can get some glue, epoxy glue, underneath the cell holder to hold it back in there, that will reinforce it. Then you can scrape the blue colour on the top of the PCB is the solder mask. And you can clear that off with a screwdriver or similar. And then we can solder a bit of wire. Add some solder to the track first, solder it at the top of the battery contact. We'll be able to solder a bit of wire on there that will hold it in place. Now I'm going to pull this right off in case somebody's pulled it right off and needs to see how to fix the front contact. So there we are, we've come right off. We've bent that contact forward. Took a fair amount of force. I don't know whether there's maybe batteries that are, I don't know. I can't see how this is really coming off so easily in some cases, but that's what's happening. So I'll need to zoom in closer so you can see what's going on in the PCB here and where we would solder to. So there's actually two different versions of the main board. The earliest ones, the positive contact here has a track that comes to a via. This is the via here. These are just points where a signal disappears under the surface of the board to go on another layer. So on some boards the via is just to the side of the pad, and you can still actually see it when the pad's in place. But very cleverly I moved the via on the later boards so that it is behind the battery pad. If I just scrape some of the solder mask off there with my tweezers. Might need to get a sharper tool, these aren't really, well, again, it's a very small ring of copper you're trying to expose. It's half a millimetre across. So there's a track and this copper pad. The copper pad goes into a layer inside the board that runs across to, let me turn around and show you where it goes. So this is the RAM chip here. So the contact that disappeared into the board from the battery there comes out on this pin of this double diode here, which is where either the main power supply or the battery power supply take precedence into the RAM chip. So the RAM chip's always powered. So we come back to the if the battery has come off, the battery holder's come off in such a way that it's pulled the track and the top of the via off altogether, then you'll need to glue it back in place and run a fine bit of insulated wire from the tab. You can run that over to the diode. But normally the way you would fix it would be just to get some solder onto that copper on top of the via, solder a little bit of wire on, wire that's long enough that it's going to come out underneath the pad, and then you would glue the battery holder back on in the right position so that the wire's coming out from underneath the contact. And then once the glue is set, you can solder a bit of wire on the negative contact there to hold that on, and then solder your piece of wire that's connected to the via, solder that onto the pad for the positive connection, and then you can check that the connection is good running a multimeter from the positive contact there, so this terminal on the battery holder, and check that that runs to this pin of this dual diode D2 that you'll see there. Right, so let's get a soldering iron and do that. Okay, I've got the soldering iron heated up. I'm going to tin a little bit of the ground plane. This is the top surface of the board is mostly covered in copper that's connected to the 0 volts or negative, which is what this terminal connects to. I hope you can see that zoomed in. This is just the little via I was talking about. Now there's a gap around the via, and then there's more ground plane close to that, so you want to make sure you've got enough solder on there, you're going to be able to solder a wire onto it, but that you don't have any bridge from the via onto the ground plane. I'm doing this with magnifiers and I can see fairly well that it's okay. So I'm going to use a bit of just enamel covered wire. I'm just going to take the enamel off, a couple of centimetres of it at the end, which I'll do off camera to save having to move everything about. Basically just ending up with a very thin 2 centimetres maybe of wire. Bit of solder on my iron. Just going to attach that wire onto the via there, so that's attached. And I'll cut it. My clippers. Try not to lose it all inside. So the next step is that I am going to glue the battery holder back onto the board in exactly the right place, and then solder a wire across the top of the circuit board here and onto the contact there, and fold this wire back over and solder it onto the top of the positive clip, which you can't really see there at the angle I'm at, but you can't really see it so well with the lights. Basically, once it's glued back in place, we need to leave the glue to set for some time, and then we can do the soldering. I'm going to use a epoxy resin glue. I mean, you could probably get away with super glue, but epoxy resin is better for filling a gap. When you're gluing it back in place, you also want to take the copper pads off the cell holder first, because they might come loose when you're soldering the wires onto the top, and there's no need for them. So you'll see that that's a sort of dull coppery colour. That's the underside of the copper tab where it was previously plated onto the fiberglass board. And if it's come off the fiberglass board, it's pulled the copper away. So usually you can get these off just by putting a bit of solder in the back just to get it to melt. Oh, did you see it's pulling itself back on the surface tension there after we got it off? So that's that one off. I'll get the other one off. And then I'll just take the excess solder off there. Might as well to do that with a bit of desolder braid if you've got it. So when you're gluing the cell holder on, the cell holder has a negative sign at the negative end, but the negative end is the terminal that has these two prongs that come out and they touch the bottom of the cell. The positive end has the two prongs that hook up onto the top of the cell. So I'm going to make up the glue that in place exactly where it was. And the epoxy's actually got the advantage that it'll probably sit a little bit higher off the board, and then there's definitely no way that the pad is going to, the positive pad isn't going to make contact with the ground plane anywhere around that. The solder mask's still intact over that ground plane, so I don't think that's going to be a problem here. Right, so we'll do the glue. Okay, I've made up some 2-pack epoxy glue. I don't know if you can see that there. This is like Yoo-Hoo branded stuff. I'm just going to score the surface of the PCB a little bit, just to give the glue a key to hold on to. There's a track that runs across there that I'm not keying into. Probably wouldn't matter if it did, but I'm just trying to do it over this area. And I'm going to put the glue onto the back of the cell holder. Just a thin layer. Don't know if you can see that with the way the lighting is, but and making sure I'm getting the negative terminal at the right end. Sit that down on top and line it up so that it's sitting exactly where it was in the first place. And then I'll need to go away and leave the glue to dry for some time, depending on the glue. Okay, so I think the epoxy is mostly cured. It's maybe a little bit soft. So for the negative end, I've got a little bit of hook up wire. I've doubled over at the end. Gonna tin that. Some solder. And then set that on the pad. Or set that on the tinned bit of the ground plane there and the pad of the cell holder. Give it enough solder so it makes a good join there. And now just snip excess off at the edge of the board. And that'll hold. It doesn't look attractive, but it'll hold on. And then for the positive terminal, a bit of wire that I soldered onto the tinned track and via earlier. I'm just going to Use it as a screwdriver. Fold that over so it's sitting on top of the pad of the cell holder. Just flow that with solder. Just make sure it's attached. Just snip off the excess bit of wire there. And that should be us ready to put a battery in, put the machine back together.